The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, hello and welcome. This is Bill Martinez, and we are live. For more information on the show, you can check it out, BillMartinezShow.com. You know, so much that's happening in our economy, and it's frustrating, and I get that, how you are feeling, because it would seem the politicians are disconnected, and they're not feeling the pain that you're enduring. I keep telling our audience, and whether it's the radio or the TV viewers like yourself, that what we're going through right now is not your fault. This is not necessarily of your doing. You didn't do this. This is all driven by policy from one Joe Biden and the Democratic Party that is not serving the constituency of, I should say should be his constituency, because we were told that he was going to be a uniter. But really what we've been experiencing is more division than uniting. But the reality is that your wallet is not lying to you. The fact of the matter is the economists have proven time and again that it's costing us under the Joe Biden administration at least $1,000 more a month for what we paid for previously. So this is why we have more month than paycheck. And again, I say this is not your fault, because you weren't the one that decided to turn off the spigot and turn us from being energy independent into energy dependent. And there's so much involved here. And with that, and this is why I'm very happy to have with us my friend, Dr. Michael Busler. Now, Dr. Busler has been on a radio show, for years. And I think this is the first time that he's going to be on the TV show. And we're going to talk about, just to get things going, Joe Biden and the Democrats have finally gotten the memo and are realizing that Bidenomics is not working. He says it's where it's not. We know it's not working. We feel the pain every day. Dr. Michael Busler, who is a public policy analyst and economics professor, is here with us now. Dr. Busler, how are you, sir? Good to have you with us.
I'm doing very well, Bill. Thanks for having me. As you know, it's always my pleasure to be with you.
Well, I got to tell you, I am thrilled that I could finally have enough time, and you could have the time to be on this extended opportunity, because we get a little bit more time to be able to talk on television through this medium here, and we can get into a little bit more of the detail, particularly as it relates to, what's happening with our economy. Because as we know, over 60%, I think almost 2/3 of the country right now is living paycheck to paycheck. It is said that most could not handle $1,000 emergency. Credit card debt at record levels. What are we up to? $1.5 trillion now and counting. There is a lot of pain here in River City, and I think it's going to make for, a rough Christmas season, frankly.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bill. And a lot of things you said in the very beginning of this show are critical. First off, you said this is not your fault, speaking to the American public. It's really a bunch of policy decisions. So let me just reinforce that a little bit. So what the big problem is inflation. Prices are up nearly 20% since President Biden took office. He takes a victory lap saying he's brought inflation down, which means they're not going to go up quite as fast as they have in the past. He did not bring prices down. So the question is, why do we have so much inflation? There's three things I think that caused it, and all government related. First off, what did not cause it? So the Biden administration blames a lot of this on supply chain disruptions from COVID. Got the economy down in 2021 and March of 2020 By July of 2021, we were producing at the same level as before the pandemic. So in total, supply was not the problem. Now, there were certain markets, there weren't enough chips, so there was a shortage there. So certain markets, you saw some supply disruptions, but in the aggregate, in the total, it was not caused by shortages in supply.
Right.
So what was it caused by? Three things. Two of them impact total demand in the economy, and they're all government related. In the last 4 fiscal years, the federal government has deficit spent, that is spent more than they took in revenue, $9 trillion. That's all excess demand, and that pulled prices up. The prior administration last year, they had a big stimulus package to get us out of that recession. That was all that was needed. Biden got into office. He passed the American Rescue Plan, which was purely inflationary, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is an oxymoron.
Right.
And he increased deficit spending by $3 trillion his first year, nearly $2 trillion in his second year and his third year, and more than $2 trillion forecast for this year. So all of that excess demand pulled prices up and led to a big chunk of our inflation. Second thing, responsibility of the federal government. The Federal Reserve, all through 2021, had what I call shockingly irresponsible monetary policy. 2021, the economy was growing at a 6% annual rate. We didn't have to stimulate the economy, yet they kept interest rates near zero all the way through 2021 and until halfway through 2022. And they kept increasing the money supply. President Biden in 2021 had a roughly $3 trillion deficit divided by 12. That's 250 billion a month. The Federal Reserve bought almost half of that by simply printing up money and expanding the money supply. So the federal government's fiscal policy and the federal government's monetary policy created excess demand that caused most of the inflation. Now, on the supply side, what we call cost push inflation, President Biden decided we didn't need fossil fuels anymore. So he got into office, he canceled the Keystone Pipeline, withdrew permits to drill on federal lands, made the permitting process more difficult, and told banks not to lend to the petroleum industry because there's no future. That reduction in supply also led to the inflation. So this was
how insane, Michael. I'm sorry to interrupt you here because this just blows me away that here he comes and his first day of office, he makes all these pronouncements like a dictator saying, okay, there's not going to be any future for fossil fuels and tells the banks that they need to, choke them off and out of existence. And he really doesn't have anything more than a theory in terms of how that's going to be replaced. There's no empirical evidence to say by choking off fossil fuels and throttling it back the way in which he was doing this, that there was something on the other side to replace said energy that was going to be depleted and everything that went along with that, the economy at all, right?
Yeah, so he wasn't concerned primarily with what was going to replace it. His primary concern was reducing the production of fossil fuels because he believed that fossil fuels are leading to climate change. And just as John Kerry said in his meeting in the Middle East this week, right, the U.S. has to get off of fossil fuels. So President Biden did everything he could to try to reduce production of fossil fuels. Let me say one other thing. Someone on your audience is likely to say, now, wait a minute, we're producing more oil today than we did when Biden got into office. And that's true. So when Biden got into office, we were producing 12.5 million barrels a day. Through his actions, production dropped down to 11 million barrels a day and prices went up. The higher prices will encourage firms to try to produce more. So in spite of Biden trying to stop the production of fossil fuels. The market said we needed more, and the market ended up supplying more. And it's a good thing they did, because that's what's helping to bring the inflation rate down. If you bought gas lately, you noticed you're paying a lot less than you were last year. So the market was able to respond, even though Biden wanted to stop production of fossil fuels.
Well, and the thing that's interesting with John Kerry in his statement at COP28, when you had the head of the UN that's there as a representative at COP28 saying that the science doesn't support what COP28 is all about. I mean, that was like the opening of COP28, and all these, you got 70,000 plus people descending, down upon Dubai to talk about climate change. And you've got the head of the whole event of the UAE saying, there's not enough science to make this empirical and to prove this theory. And of course, John Kerry and Al Gore, their head exploded.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you take an objective look at what the science says, the scientific community is relatively split. I don't know if it's half, but about half, I would say.
Well, it depends. It depends on who's getting money from the government. If the ones that are getting money from the government, guess what? They're supporting Joe Biden's theory here. If they're disconnected and you get more of an objective opinion and research paper, from them, then you get a fair-minded idea of what's happening with climate. And it refutes just straight out the theories and the postulates that are being thrown out by the likes of John Kerry and the president.
Exactly. Bill, the truth is the climate has been changing for thousands of years.
Exactly.
And will likely continue to change into the future. Human beings have adapted to the climate change, and we've been able to live very successfully with changing climates. The climate will continue to change. Now, they argue fossil fuels is speeding up the climate change. Some say that's true. Some say it's not. Even if it is true, the climate will change anyway. So you're not going to stop the climate from changing. Maybe slow it down a little bit. But if the price to pay for that is you destroy your entire economy, it simply is not worth it. Energy is very important to every economy.
Exactly.
And if you change the price of energy and the availability, it's going to have an impact on all the manufacturing sectors, how we live. Before they went ahead and did this, they should have given us a lot more thought. They started pushing electric cars on us. The way this is supposed to work, if there's going to be a transition from gasoline powered to electric, let the marketplace handle it, just like the marketplace handles everything. We used to have a horse and buggy. Cars came out. The government didn't mandate anything, but the marketplace took care of that, and we made the transition. And that's how transitions are made. There is insufficient demand right now to buy the number of electric vehicles that the president is trying to push. So when
you got these dealerships yelling and screaming, Michael, that they've got too much inventory. Nobody wants to buy this, to your exact point. You see, the deal is that it started with Barack Obama, of course, continued into this, what some are saying is the third run for presidency, the third administration of Obama here under Biden. But this is really that and on steroids, because they are forcing people into this. You don't have a choice. I mean, this is supposed to be a land of the free, home of the brave. But what's happened when you have tied up 40% of the populace to go along with you because you've bought their votes, that they have sold themselves out to a government check. And so they're beholden to the Democratic Party. They have got to go along to get along. And the rest of us are having to put up with this. And it's absolutely nonsensical. Just like you said, common sense. If you had any concern for your constituency, and if you were concerned that you might be voted out of office, you might listen to what they're saying and respond to the market. But they feel where they're at right now that they can force this down people's throats. This goes back to Obama's announcement for the fundamental transformation of America. the fundamental transformation of America meant that you were going to have less liberty and you were going to surrender your sovereignty and your liberty to these oligarchs, this elite ruling class that was going to tell you when and how.
That's exactly right. And the Biden administration feels that they know what's best for the public rather than allowing the public to determine what is best for them. Look, we have a very democratic system with our economy. When people go to buy something, think of it as if you're casting dollar votes. So if you see a product that you believe is a good value and you buy it, think of it like you're voting for that product.
Exactly.
Well, the product with the most dollar votes or the most profitable, they're going to continue to be made. The products that nobody votes for, the companies aren't going to have sales and probably have losses. Those products come off the market. So instead of the government deciding what each of us should have, we can decide ourselves what we should have and cast our votes accordingly. That's how the market is supposed to operate. And any transition or disruptions in the market from one product to another, it is taken care of through these dollar votes in the marketplace, not through the government mandating what has to happen.
Well, and the other thing too, and you touched on this slightly, and this might sound a little irreverent to some people, but the thing that we need to consider here is that Joe Biden is having a Dickens of a time and has had a Dickens of a time taking care of his own family, running his own family. We know, it's clear they've lived their lives out in the public domain. Yes. It is not symbolic of what we would say is the ideal American family. I mean, they in a sense, it's typical. I mean, all families have their challenges. Nobody is perfect. But I mean, Joe Biden has had his hands full with his family and the dysfunction. So how am I to respect the example of Joe Biden and listen to him like he knows better than I do when he can't even run his own family, Michael?
Yeah, so all his policies have led to this very severe inflation problem. And again, the Federal Reserve was responsible. Finally, in June of 2022, the Federal Reserve realized, we're supposed to keep prices stable too. So they started increasing interest rates very quickly. Now they've eased off a little bit. I'm not sure they're really done raising rates yet. They believe they are. Wall Street believes they're going to start cutting rates next year. I'm not so sure of that. But the Federal Reserve has had to react. And you mentioned before about consumers being tapped out. Well, yes. Much of the expansion, we had all the excess demand from the government, but consumers were able to spend. Why? The federal government was handing out free money for a couple of years there. The average family of four, whether you were negatively impacted economically by the virus or not, the average family of four got over $11,000 in free money from the government. Most of it they ended up putting away, and then when the economy reopened and things were growing, they went out and spent it. Consumers got so used to spending that even when that ran out, they said, well, maybe I'll start putting things in my credit card. Prices are higher, I'm going to have to do that anyway. So credit card debt is sky high. Interest rates, in order to curb some of this demand, interest rates have been raised to sky high levels. And now that's putting a tremendous strain on consumers and business. I talk to small business people, the ones I consult with, and they tell me my line of credit is up to 10.5%. He says, look, I've had a line of credit. I pay 1 or 2 points over prime. Well, last year or two, prime was 3.5%. Prime rates now 8.5%. So they're paying 9-10% for their money. They said, look, I just can't do this. I'm going to have to raise my prices, or I'm just going to have to cut back on what I produce. How about people who want to buy a house? Yeah,
but, and also getting back to the small business, what do they do when they got their employees saying, I need more money because I'm underwater here? Yes, the economy is X, but inflation is chewed up the raise that you gave me the first part of the year, right?
So labor starts to ask for higher wage increases. That leads to what we call a wage price spiral. So in other words, inflation went up. It peaked at 9% on an annual basis, came down to 3.2, but inflation went up. So the auto workers say, boy, look at how much inflation went up. And they ended up getting, once you add everything into it, what amounts to about a 7% increase in their compensation package, wages and benefits, et cetera, a 7% increase. Well, business says your productivity didn't increase 7%. Exactly. So as a result, labor costs are going to go up. So Mary Barra, GM of General Motors, said this labor contract will add at least $1,000 to the price of every car. So now you have these wage increases going up, prices went up, wages just went up higher. Now prices are going to have to go up higher to cover that. And then labor's going to say, look, I need even a higher wage increase. We're in the middle of a wage price spiral. I know that rates come down to 3.2%, but starting next year, when all these big wage increases kick in, I'm afraid inflation is going to go back up again. And then what's the Federal Reserve going to do? Now, to be fair, most people don't agree with me. Most people think we brought the inflation under control and the Federal Reserve can start cutting rates next year. Again, I don't agree with that, because once the unions got these 7% wage increases, everybody's going in and say, hey, they got a 7% wage
me too.
increase. I deserve that too. And we get into this nasty wage price spiral.
And then how about government subsidies that are going to come into play, Michael?
Yeah, that just adds more excess demand to the economy. And I know they're trying to help people, but you don't help people by giving them free stuff.
Exactly.
If you really want to help people, show them how to earn the money so they can buy their own stuff, rather than taking money away from taxpayers. Remember, the government doesn't have any money. All they have is what they take from those of us that earned the money.
Exactly.
So instead of taking more money away from us and giving it to people who, for whatever reason, haven't earned it, give the people who haven't earned it the opportunity to earn their own money so they can buy their own things. That's what the prior administration did. They had the unemployment rate down to 3.5%. The inflation rate was 1.5%. There was opportunities for people to go out and earn their own money. The poverty rate during the last administration went from 14% down to 10%.
That's
I don't
huge.
know if it was the best economy we ever had, as the president likes to say, but it was certainly a very good economy where people didn't have to become dependent on the government. And that's the problem, too, when you start handing out free stuff. People start to depend on it, and it creates a lifelong problem. Real quick, Bill, the example I always give in my class, you have a fisherman who's catching a lot of fish, way more than he needs for his family. Right. And you have a hungry person. So the Democrats would say, look, the guy's got a lot of fish. He doesn't need all that fish. So give the fish to the person who's hungry. Now that creates two problems. One, the fisherman has to catch enough fish in the future for his family and for the people you gave it to. And the people you gave it to become dependent on the fisherman for their survival. Rather, teach the hungry people how to fish. Then they get their own fish and all the problems go away.
Yeah, because the problem you have that seems to be inherent with one party over the other. The Democrats think about giving away and with entitlements. And what that does is that robs the individual who is on the receiving end of said entitlement. It robs them of their dignity. It also robs them of their joy, because we know, psychologists in their studies will tell you and prove this out time and again, is we're happiest when we are being productive. And when we take away that opportunity for people to be happy, okay, maybe we've put a Band-Aid over the problem short term. And but what happens, and this is what really galls me about this whole strategy that the Democrats employ. It's not about the advancement of an individual to make that individual better, because if they did, then they would give them a rod and reel and go out and teach them how to fish. But no, what it is it short circuits the process and says, hey, remember who gave you this money. They don't think of it as coming from Republicans and Democrats and their fellow American citizens, they only see it as coming from Joe Biden and the Democrats, and there is a string attached to that. And that is that you're going to be beholden to the Democratic Party. And every time an election comes up, you know that you have to vote for that D, wherever that D is at, that's where you put a check mark, because they're the ones that give you that check every day. And God forbid that you would try and think somebody else is going to do it, because the Democratic Party is the party that gives you free stuff that you haven't earned at the expense of the American citizen, and also at the expense of your own integrity and dignity. And I would say your happiness, because you're less than. You're not out there exercising your gifts and talents and contributing and becoming better for it. They basically shut you down, and they bring you into the bureaucratic plantation that levels you off and makes you mediocre, Michael.
Yeah, Bill, and what's really very disturbing, or even more disturbing about this, is it tends to be multi-generational. My kids went to an inner city high school, and in the inner cities, there's the social problems and a lot of people dependent on the government. I talked to kids that their mother's dependent, they expect to be dependent, their grandmother was dependent. Right. This is multi-generational. Ever since Lyndon Johnson in 1965, I think it was, put forth his great society. We're going to end poverty by giving everybody free stuff. These people are dependent on now for generations. And you're right. They're not happy. They tend to get angry. It leads to drug use. It leads to higher crime. It leads to teenage pregnancies. It leads to kids dropping out of high school, because why should they do anything? The government is going to take care of me. It's a horrible mentality.
And the other thing too, Michael, what it does, and I keep sounding the alarm on this because it's starting to rise up again. It did this during the Obama administration. And that is, you get the side hustle going on. You get these people that are double dipping. They get government support, and then they go out and they get jobs working under the table. Those that are still industrious, right? And we're not talking, the guys that are in gangs selling drugs. That's a whole nother element altogether. But I'm just talking about, people who sit there and go, I'm tired of watching reruns of Oprah. I think I'm going to go out and get a job. And they're getting paid, $15-20 an hour under the table, no taxes. And, we're not talking just a couple of hundred. I mean, there are millions of people. I think it was estimated during the Obama years that that population raised or that workforce was somewhere around 8 to 10 million people. That's a lot of tax money.
Yeah. And, they have to work under the table, because if they have any income, it's going to reduce the amount that the government gives them. So now what happens is you have two people that have to break the law. Somebody says, I'll work under the table. So he's getting income. He's not declaring. That's against the law. The person that's paying him, who'd like to be an honorable business person, says, look, the only way I can get people, this guy will only work if I pay him under the table, and I have to do that. So now we have two people breaking the law, and you continue to have this dependence on the federal government, which is horrible. Bill, I've talked about this on your radio show before. Remember what I talked about, the 4 principles that really made America great? Remember?
Exactly. Yes.
We went from the birth of a nation to the number one largest, most prosperous economy in the world in about 150 years. Other countries were hundreds, some cases thousands of years older. So what I believe the reasons for that is, one, we encouraged individual freedom. As long as you didn't infringe upon anybody else's rights, you can pretty much do what you wanted. Secondly, we encouraged individual responsibility. As long as you were mentally and physically able to take care of yourself, everybody pretty much took care of themselves, although we had strong family back then, and the family would help. Thirdly, we had low rates of taxation. So when you earned something, you knew you were going to keep pretty much most of what you earned. And fourthly, we had a limited role for government. Certain functions the government has to provide: defense of the country, leadership, a legal system, etc. But other than that, the government stayed out of the way. So individual freedom, individual responsibility, low rates of taxation, and a limited role for government are what made the country great. President Biden, all 4 of those, he's going to do exactly the opposite.
Exactly. Well, and look at the results. I mean, they're right before the American people. And the challenge that we have coming up in this next election, Michael, as I said earlier, 40% of the country, the base, because this is the thing that's, the pollsters have been saying 40% of the country say Joe Biden is doing a great job. And I go, where are they? I want to talk to somebody. I want to understand why they believe Joe Biden is doing a great job, because the evidence doesn't support this. And, and I'd been asking this question for several months going, where are these 40%? Because I don't see them here in Florida. And I don't, I'm not talking to them. I'm not traveling in their circles. I can't seem to connect with anybody. And then, of course, and then let me finish this then. Yeah. But then last week we had the debate between Newsom and Ron DeSantis, right? And I go, there's the one. He's one of the 40%. Because he goes, Joe Biden, he's 100% healthy. He's 100% up to the job. What?
So I tried to find the answer to that question. Now, I teach at a university that was once a liberal arts college, so it's very liberal university. Right. I think out of 330 faculty members, I found 3 other ones that share my views. But so I asked them, they said, we support Biden. I said, what reasons do you have for supporting him? Well, climate change is an existential threat. He's the only one that's doing anything about it, and I support that being done. Secondly, a woman should have a right to have an abortion anytime she wants. It's her body, and Biden will protect that. Thirdly, there's a lot of underprivileged people and people that need help, and Biden is willing to give them as much government money as they need for help. So I'm voting for Biden. Those are the things that are most important to me. I say to them, well, what about if your taxes go up? I'll pay a little more taxes, they say, if I can get all those things. Well, what about if the economy is not doing very well? I'll live with that if we can get those things. How about inflation? Well, inflation isn't Biden's fault. It's because the Russians invaded Ukraine and we had some supply chain disruption. So none of the inflation is Biden's fault. That's what these people tell me who support Biden.
Exactly. And oh, yeah, let's ignore the fact that Biden's border policies is costing the American people $451 billion a year, Michael. Okay, so that add that on top of inflation and everything else we're dealing with, and these poor policies that have been enacted by the Biden administration and the Democrats, and you go, okay, when is enough enough?
So I asked them about that too, and they tell me, look, there are a lot of people in the world that are just in very difficult conditions. They live in countries where the government is very repressive and they fear for their lives. All they want to do is to have a chance to live a nice life. So yeah, we ought to let all these people in. So I say to them, well, all of them, or should we have some kind of a limit to it? I mean,
or some criteria that would promote assimilation and make sure the people who are coming in were going to reinforce and advance the great American idea, right?
So in the last year of the prior administration, the U.S. admitted over 1 million immigrants legally. Yes. That's more than every country in the world combined. So I say to them, look, we let in 1 million legally. Do we need these 6 million people that have come in illegally? And they say, well, that's just a consequence we have to pay to be able to help some of these people. What I'm really worried about, you see lists of where these people are coming from. They're not just coming from South America, Central America, and Mexico. I think there were 26,000 from China. There were 7,000 apprehended from Iran, 169 people on the terrorist watch list. And they say, well, we'll have to live with that because we have a humanitarian responsibility to help these people.
Well, how about if they move in next door to you and they're killing your kids, which illegal immigrants are responsible for killing American citizens in every state of the country. So I guess that's okay by your measure.
I guess they didn't answer that directly, but they said, look, I know this immigration is a problem and it's for cities around where I live. It really isn't much of a problem. So I don't actually see all this. And the big cities, they said they're sanctuary cities. They should have the ability to take care of these people. Now that the numbers are so high, I ought to go back to them and find out what their views are now. Now we have so many people that, I mean, look what's happening in New York City.
Well, New York. I mean, yeah, exactly. The mayor of New York before was all for sanctuary cities and everything. And then now, I mean, and he got himself with the current regime, his fellow Democratic standard bearer, because he called him out for it and said, look, we're going broke. You need to send over $12 billion, Red Rover, because we can't handle this anymore. Your open border policies are killing us. And so Joe Biden's answer was, I think he sent the feds over to investigate him.
Yeah. And another thing that's happening, these illegal immigrants are coming in, and wherever they're being housed, you're pushing homeless people out.
Exactly.
And a lot of these homeless people
you're pushing vets out of residences as well. But go ahead.
I think the Army-Navy game was scheduled for this week. People were looking at hotels to stay there. These hotels are filled with illegal immigrants. The people who wanted to watch the Army-Navy game have nowhere to stay now. This
bring a tent.
Immigration problem
is
going
to be a bivouac. Yeah, exactly.
It's a huge problem we have to deal with. I applaud the Republicans. Yesterday, I look, I'm all for helping Israel, giving them as much aid as they need. I like helping the Ukraine. We really should watch how much we're giving them, but I like helping Ukraine. And the Republicans said, so do we, but you're not doing anything about the border. So if you want to have this aid approved, tell us that you're going to stop this problem at the border. And Biden said it's irresponsible. The Republicans are trying to hold up aid, et cetera. But the Republicans are saying, look, we've been trying to stop this problem since you got into office. We can't do it. Right. Finally, we're taking a stand. We're not approving any more foreign aid in those areas, even though they're greatly needed, until you do something about the border.
Exactly. Well, and I agree with you, Michael, that here it is. When you control the House, you got the power of the purse, and the Republicans have not exercised the use of that of that weapon in the same manner that Nancy Pelosi did, right?
Yeah, the Republicans are always afraid if something bad happens, they're going to get blamed. So if the government
they get blamed anyway. Come on.
If the government has to shut down, it's all the Republicans' fault. Right. We have deficits in the budget. While the Republicans control the House, they're responsible for the spending. So it's the Republicans' fault. So I think up until recently, the Republicans were saying, look, we just have to walk softly here. We're going to get blamed for everything. Speaker Johnson now is taking a much harder view, and I think it's about time this is done. We're not approving anything else in aid until you address this border problem. Mayorkas says we don't have a problem. He goes, testifies in front of Congress, the border is secure. I don't know what his definition of secure is, but with all these people, I think yesterday there were 12,000 illegals came in one day was a record for the number of people that came in. Not only isn't it secure, it's getting more insecure. We need to do something about this.
Well, the other thing too, Michael, and President Trump was maligned for this in pointing out that these countries were not sending the best of their people to America. And of course, the mainstream media did us all a disservice by not reporting on the fact that what these presidents of Central America countries in particular were doing was they were emptying their jails, and they were sending their problem children to America with felonies, with criminal offenses, and they send them here. So Trump says they're not sending their best. And oh my God, the heads exploded. The liberals went nuts. They couldn't believe that the president of the United States would say such an awful thing. But then the fact of the matter is that was true. And, and as I mentioned earlier, which the Remembrance Project has noted, and they've documented all these murders across the country. But the other thing that's happened in this process is that the cartels themselves, I mean, we talk about the tunnels that are happening and that Israel is dealing with in the Gaza, right? Well, cartels have their own tunnels coming in under the border, coming into America, bringing in fentanyl, drugs, young boys and girls for human trafficking. And also, it was pointed out, I think the FBI pointed this out because they showed a map that in just about every state of the union, all but 8 states, Michael, the cartel has an infrastructure that supports their supply chain of drugs and human trafficking.
Yeah, and worse yet, Christopher Wray testified yesterday. He was asked, "Do you see a lot of hot spots where potential problems occur?" He says, "I see them all over the country. The map is lighting up red." So all of these illegal immigrants that are not just South Americans, they're from all over. They're coming in. They're forming could be terrorist cells, and now we have to worry about a terrorism act here in our country, in addition to the terrible crime problem that we have here, because the Democratic district attorneys refuse to put anybody in jail. So they end up putting convicted criminals back out on the street, and we end up having all that problem.
Exactly. Michael, this is the nonsensical thing that's happening in our country today. And we're so ripe. I mean, here it is. What did it take for 9/11 to take this country down and kill almost 3,000 people? And we were all heartbroken and said, never again. And here we are under 2 Democratic Party regimes in Obama and Biden. Our gates and our doors and our walls have fallen. We're letting people come in. I received a report the other day and said that they have discovered something like 20 Hamas cells operating within the United States. Think about that.
Yeah, it's just a matter of time until they do something. So the primary function of the government is to keep the people safe, and they're certainly not doing that by letting all these terrorists come into the country and by allowing all this crime that we have. I live near Philadelphia. I was born in Philadelphia. I used to be, I wasn't afraid to walk virtually anywhere in the city, anytime, day or night. I used to feel okay with that. Now, some spots you try to avoid, but for the most part, I was happy. Today, I'm afraid to even go in the city. Even if I drive a car, you're afraid your car's going to get carjacked by somebody, and I've seen a number of those. I look in the stores. The people break into the stores. Nobody does anything. They load up all their stuff and leave, and there's no
consequence.
Right. And even if they get caught, nothing happens to them.
Right.
Well, if there's no price to pay for a crime, the crimes are going to get committed. These are people commit crimes because they want something that they don't have. They can't buy it. So most people will say, well, let's earn some money, save up for it. But if you can go in and steal it without any kind of consequences, you'll just go in and do that. Now,
meanwhile, the businesses are going to go, I'm out of here. Exactly. I mean, look what's happening across the country. These communities, they're losing these businesses. That means their tax base is going to be downgraded. They're going to be in a situation where, young people who would go to these businesses for jobs, they don't have jobs anymore or less job opportunities. So this is all being done. Michael, we've got about maybe 6 minutes remaining here. And I do want to, address these charts that goes back to what we talked about earlier in terms of spending that has taken place in excess of $7 trillion. So if we can go ahead and put up chart 1 so that Michael can comment on this and explain to our viewers, what's been happening with our economy here. This is the spending spree that Joe Biden's administration has been under that has totaled over $7 trillion. Go ahead and address this, Michael.
So all of that turns into excess demand, because where do they get that money? They have to borrow the money. So it wasn't money that they got in tax revenue. It's money that they have to borrow, creating excess demand and adding to the public debt. And the public debt is a serious problem. We're in debt now over $33 trillion. Now, people say to me, well, is that a problem? And I say, yes, it's a problem for two reasons. Most economists will say if you keep the public debt less than 1 year's GDP, you can probably handle it. Well, GDP is in the 24, 25 trillion range. We're up to 33 trillion. So what's the problem with that, they ask me? Two problems. One, interest has to be paid on that annually. And when they sell a bond, there's no program in place to ever pay back the bond. So what happens is the bond matures, they don't have the money, they sell new bonds to pay back the old bonds. Well,
can you say pyramid scheme? Here we are. We're in a pyramid scheme now.
Yeah, people throw around the name Ponzi every time I bring this up.
Yeah, exactly.
So the interest charges now will approach $500 billion this year. And once we refinance the debt that we took out at 1.5% interest, today it's 4.5% interest. You're going to triple the interest expense just by refinancing. And Biden continues to add nearly $2 trillion a year to the debt. We have to deal with this. Every president for the last 5 or 6 said, well, we'll get by now and we'll let the next guy worry. We'll kick the can down the road.
Right.
Well, at the end of the road.
Pull up that next chart. Let's pull up that next chart because this shows the trajectory here. And, clearly what's been happening and what these administrations have been doing here. And to Michael's point, you can see, what happened, how after, what was it, 2000, where everything just went vertical, right?
Yeah, the Bush administration had a little more debt than they should have had. That's really where it started. But some of that I give him a break on because look at Clinton had basically took military money and put us in the black, got us out of the red. We were looking pretty good, and so then 9/11 comes. And Bush finds himself, he goes to the cupboard, much the same way that Trump did when he went to the cupboard and we needed PPE and Obama didn't fill the cupboards up. So now we went into a mad scramble and we had to, pay excess dollars. And so similar thing happened with Bush in this transition from Clinton. The military cupboards were bare and we had to warrior up real quick because of 9/11 and, going to Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Yeah. And the big deficit spending started in 2010. Obama had a $1.4 trillion deficit. The first time deficits have gone over $1 trillion. And since that time, we've been averaging over $1 trillion annual deficit. And that's why that public debt has skyrocketed and we're at the end of the road. It's time to do something about this. We have to work. If you can't balance the budget, at least get as close to balancing as you possibly can. There's no more road here. It's got to be dealt with immediately.
Yeah, Obama and his shovel-ready jobs, remember? And he laughed about it.
Yeah, I guess
I mean, these knuckleheads, they couldn't last a job in the private industry.
Yeah.
Right? The private sector would have spit them out a long time ago. But here it is. We have to put up with them 4 years at a time, to suffer under the consequences. And as you say, they're not creating anything. They're putting the pressure on us, the taxpayers, and they just keep beating the horses because they need more money. They need more bricks. We got to keep supplying bricks to the Pharaoh, right?
That's exactly right. And when we started before, I said that it's low rates of taxation and a limited role for government that allowed the country to grow. Now they're talking about raising taxes, having people pay their fair share, whatever that means.
Right.
So by raising taxes and increasing government spending, you're doing exactly opposite to what made the country great.
Well, and we saw it under Trump. We saw it under Ronald Reagan. You liberate the workforce, you make it fair, and it gets robust, and you can recover. And I know that Donald Trump's idea, because anybody that knows anything about about the management of a company and a business, is that you can cover a lot of sins with positive cash flow. but you've got to make that the priority. And what you're hearing from the Biden administration and from the Democratic Party is one-sided, to your exact point, Michael. They're not talking about it in a holistic sort of way, because it took us a long time to get here, and we've got to stop it at some point. And we're going to have to deal with the pain of getting this country back on track and applying some fiscal disciplines, or else, we're done.
Yeah. And you say we have to do it at some point. This is the point. We can't go any further. We're past the limit. Before it turns into a very severe problem, we're going to have to deal with it right away. Again, I applaud the Republicans for standing up for this.
Well, Dr. Michael Busler, as always, an honor and a pleasure to have some time and to, dive deeper into this discussion and the fiscal reality of what everyday Americans are dealing with. And again, we assure them their eyes and their wallets are not lying to them. This is real. It's costing us all at least $1,000 more every month because of the policies that have been inflicted upon us by this administration and by Joe Biden's policies. Dr. Michael Busler, the public policy analyst and economics professor, has been our guest. Michael, as always, an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Bill. Look forward to doing it again.
And thank you for sharing a part of your time with us. May God bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Thanks again for being with us. Take care. God bless.